At 1:16 a.m. on June 6, 1944, Staff Sergeant Thomas Whitaker sat in the radio compartment of C-47 number 42-92847, 30 miles from the Normandy coast. German flak batteries had just opened fire. The pilot's voice crackled through his headset. They were 3 minutes from the drop zone. 127 paratroopers sat in the cargo bay behind him, packed tight, waiting to jump. Whitaker's job was simple. Monitor the Pathfinder signal, confirm the coordinates, tell the pilot when they reached drop zone A. He'd done it 17 times in training. Never missed once. The cockpit was freezing. Whitaker's breath fogged in the thin air at 800 feet. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. The radio console flickered. Green light, yellow light, red light. Each one meant something different. He'd memorized the sequence 2 months ago at the airfield in England. Green meant the Pathfinder beacon was active. Yellow meant they were approaching the drop zone. Red meant jump. But tonight, the lights made no sense. Whitaker stared at his console. The green light blinked twice, then stopped, then blinked 3 times, then nothing. His training manual said the beacon should pulse steady, 1 pulse per second. This wasn't steady. This was chaos. He checked his frequency dial. 38.7 megahertz. Correct. He checked his antenna connection. Secure. He tapped the console. The green light blinked 4 times, paused, then went dark. Behind him, the cargo door was open. Wind howled through the fuselage. The paratroopers sat in 2 rows, hooked to the static line, faces painted black, weapons strapped to their legs. They couldn't hear the radio. They couldn't see the lights. They only knew what Whitaker told the pilot. And right now, Whitaker had no idea what to tell him. The pilot's voice again. Radio, confirm Pathfinder signal. Over. Whitaker hesitated. His mouth was dry. He tasted metal. His manual said if the beacon malfunctioned, report it immediately. Abort the drop. Circle back. Wait for orders. But there were no orders. There was no time. The entire invasion depended on the first wave hitting the drop zones on schedule. If they circled back, they'd run into the second wave. 200 planes in the dark, no lights, no room for error. The flak was getting closer. Orange bursts lit up the sky to the south. Whitaker could see tracers arcing up from the coast. The Germans knew they were coming. Every second they stayed on course brought them closer to the guns. He looked at his console again. The yellow light flickered, then the red light. Then both went dark. According to his training, this meant the beacon was offline. Dead. They were flying blind. The pilot's voice, sharper now. Radio, I need confirmation. Are we on course? Whitaker's hand shook on the transmit button. He had 2 choices. Tell the truth, beacon's dead, abort the drop, and watch the entire mission collapse. Or lie. Tell the pilot they were on course. Trust his gut. Trust the lights he couldn't understand. He pressed the button. Pilot, Pathfinder signal is... And then he saw it. On his console, tucked beneath the frequency dial, was a second dial he'd never noticed before. A backup frequency selector. It was set to 38.7 megahertz. But next to it, in tiny stenciled letters, it said, Alt 42.1. Whitaker blinked. His training had never mentioned an alternate frequency. But the lights were still dead on 38.7. He had nothing to lose. He twisted the dial to 42.1. The green light blazed steady. 1 pulse per second. Perfect. The yellow light came on. They were 2 miles from the drop zone. Whitaker grabbed the transmit button. Pilot, confirm Pathfinder signal. Green and steady. We're on course. The pilot didn't hesitate. Copy that. 2 minutes to drop. Whitaker exhaled. His hands stopped shaking. He'd done it. Found the backup frequency. Saved the drop. But what he didn't know was this. The frequency he'd just switched to wasn't the Pathfinder beacon for Drop Zone A. It was the beacon for Drop Zone C, 6 miles south, deep in enemy territory, right into the teeth of the German 91st Infantry Division. and he just told the pilot to keep flying straight toward it. To understand what happened that night, you need to know how the Allies planned to drop 15,000 paratroopers into Normandy in total darkness. The plan depended on something called pathfinders. These were small teams of paratroopers who jumped first, 30 minutes before the main force. Their job was simple: land, set up radio beacons, mark the drop zones with lights, guide the C-47s to the right coordinates. The Pathfinder beacon transmitted on a specific frequency. Each drop zone had its own frequency. Drop zone A was 38.7 MHz. Drop zone B was 40.2. Drop zone C was 42.1. The radio operators on the C-47s had these frequencies written on cards taped to their consoles. They were supposed to tune to the correct frequency, follow the signal, and drop the paratroopers exactly where they needed to be. In training, it worked perfectly. In England, during the rehearsals in April and May, every single drop hit within 200 yards of the target. The Pathfinders set up their beacons. The C-47s followed the signals. The paratroopers landed in neat clusters. Commanders called it the most precise airborne operation in history. But Normandy wasn't England. The first problem was the weather. On June 5th, a storm rolled across the English Channel. Winds hit 35 miles per hour. Cloud cover dropped to 400 feet. General Eisenhower almost canceled the invasion. But the weather forecast said the storm would break just after midnight. A 6-hour window. Enough time to launch the Armada. Enough time to drop the paratroopers. The decision was made. The invasion was on. The second problem was German flak. Allied intelligence had identified 42 anti-aircraft batteries along the Normandy coast. They were wrong. There were 87. When the C-47s crossed the coastline at 1 a.m., the sky erupted. Tracer fire lit up the darkness. Shells exploded at 800 feet. Pilots broke formation. They climbed. They dove. They banked hard left and right, anything to avoid the flak. Within 10 minutes, the tight V formations they'd practiced for months scattered across 50 square miles of French countryside. The third problem was the Pathfinders themselves. Of the 18 Pathfinder teams that jumped at 12:30 a.m., only 6 landed near their drop zones. The rest were blown off course by the wind. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned. Some landed in German positions and were killed or captured before they could set up their beacons. Some landed so far from their drop zones that their signals never reached the incoming C-47s. By 1 a.m., chaos was complete. Radio operators on the C-47s searched for Pathfinder signals. Some found nothing. Some found signals so weak they couldn't track them. Some found multiple signals on the same frequency and had no idea which one was real. The pilots had 3 choices: follow a weak signal and hope it was correct, drop the paratroopers blind and hope they landed somewhere useful, or abort the drop and circle back, wasting fuel and time. Most chose to drop blind. The results were catastrophic. Paratroopers landed in trees, in rivers, in the middle of German encampments. Some landed 20 miles from their objectives. The 101st Airborne lost half its men in the first hour. Not killed, just scattered, lost, wandering through hedgerows in the dark, trying to find their units, trying to find their objectives, trying to stay alive. The planners had assumed radio navigation would work. They'd tested it dozens of times, but they'd never tested it in a storm. With flak, with half the Pathfinder beacons offline, with pilots breaking formation, and radio operators guessing which signal was real. Thomas Whitaker had been taught to trust the system, follow the frequency card, trust the beacon, trust the plan. But the plan had already failed, and the frequency he'd just switched to wasn't part of any plan at all. Whitaker watched the yellow light pulse on his console. Steady, strong, the strongest signal he'd seen all night. He felt a wave of relief. The backup frequency worked. They were on course. In 90 seconds, 127 paratroopers would jump into Drop Zone A, link up with the Pathfinder team, and push inland toward their objective, a bridge over the Merdere River. If they took that bridge, the Germans couldn't move reinforcements east. If they lost it, the entire Utah Beach landing was at risk. The pilot's voice came through again. "Radio, confirm we're tracking Drop Zone A beacon. Over." Whitaker looked at his frequency card. It was taped to the console, right next to the dial. Drop Zone A was listed as 38.7 megahertz, but 38.7 had been dead, dark, useless. The only working signal was 42.1. Whitaker assumed it was the alternate frequency, a backup the Pathfinder switched to when the primary failed. It made sense. The Army always had backups. He pressed the transmit button. "Pilot, affirmative. Tracking Drop Zone A. Signal is green." What Whitaker didn't know was this. His frequency card was wrong. Not completely wrong, just incomplete. The card listed the primary frequencies for each drop zone, but it didn't list the alternates. Those were in a separate document, distributed to pilots and navigators 2 days before the invasion. Radio operators weren't given that document. They didn't need it. Their job was to monitor the primary frequency. If it failed, they reported it. Someone else made the decision to switch. But no one had told Whitaker that. So when he twisted the dial to 42.1, he thought he was following procedure. He thought he was doing his job. He thought he was saving the mission. The red light came on. 30 seconds to the drop zone. Behind Whitaker, the jumpmaster stood at the open door. Wind roared through the cargo bay. The paratroopers were on their feet, hooked to the static line, ready to jump. Whitaker could see their silhouettes against the night sky. They trusted the pilot. The pilot trusted Whitaker. And Whitaker trusted a frequency card that was missing half the information he needed. The pilot banked left. Whitaker felt the plane tilt. His stomach lurched. The green light on his console pulsed faster. They were close. Very close. He checked his watch. 1:19 a.m. Right on schedule. Then the flak hit. The explosion was to the south, close enough that Whitaker felt the shock wave. The plane shuddered. Metal groaned. The red light on his console flickered. For a moment, Whitaker thought they'd been hit. But the engines kept running. The wings stayed level. The pilot's voice was calm. "We're through it. 30 seconds. Whitaker exhaled. His hands were shaking again. He gripped the edge of the console. The green light pulsed. The yellow light stayed solid. The red light blazed. Everything was working. Everything was perfect. Except the beacon they were following was 6 miles south of where they thought it was. Drop Zone C was supposed to receive the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. A different unit. A different objective. But the 501st's Pathfinder team had landed in a flooded field. 3 men drowned. 2 were captured. Only 1 survived. He set up his beacon, but he was half a mile off target, deep in a forest, surrounded by German positions. That was the beacon Whitaker was tracking. The jumpmaster raised his arm. 5 seconds. The pilot pulled back on the throttle. The plane slowed to 110 miles per hour. Jump speed. The paratroopers shuffled toward the door. First man in position. Second man ready. Third man hooked. The static line was taut. Whitaker pressed the transmit button one last time. "Pilot, we're over the drop zone. Green light confirmed." The jumpmaster slapped the first man on the shoulder, and 127 paratroopers jumped into the wrong drop zone. What made this crisis worse was that no one on the plane knew. The first paratrooper out the door was Private First Class Daniel Kowalski. He counted to 4, felt the static line jerk, felt his parachute deploy. Then he was falling through darkness. Wind screamed past his helmet. Tracer fire arced across the sky to his left. He couldn't see the ground. Couldn't see the other paratroopers. Couldn't see anything except the black shape of the C-47 banking away above him. His boots hit earth at 1:21 a.m. Hard. He rolled, got tangled in his chute, cut himself free, lay flat in the grass, listening. Crickets. Wind. Distant machine gun fire to the north. No voices, no shouts. No one calling out the rally signal. He was alone. Kowalski checked his compass. He was supposed to land east of the Marderay River, 2 miles from the bridge, rally with his squad, move to the objective. Simple. But his compass showed he was facing south. That couldn't be right. The drop was east. He tapped the compass. The needle held steady. South. He pulled out his map, used his red lens flashlight, found his position based on the terrain, and felt his stomach drop. He wasn't near the Marderay River. He was 6 miles south, near a village called Sainte-Mère-Église. That's when he heard the trucks. 3 of them, maybe 4. Diesel engines, coming from the east. Kowalski dropped flat behind a hedgerow. The trucks rolled past, 30 yards away. He could see their shapes in the darkness. German Opel Blitz transports, canvas-covered cargo beds, probably carrying troops, or ammunition, or both. They were heading north, toward Utah Beach. Kowalski stayed flat, counted 30 seconds after the trucks passed, then crawled west, toward where he thought the rest of his unit might be. He found 2 other paratroopers in a ditch. Neither was from his platoon. One was from the 506th, one was from the 502nd. Different regiments, different drop zones. "Where the hell are we?" the 506th trooper asked. "South of where we're supposed to be," Kowalski said. "Maybe 6 miles." Jesus Christ! They heard more trucks, coming from the south this time. The 3 paratroopers pressed into the ditch. Kowalski counted 5 trucks, all heading north, all German, all moving fast. That's when he understood. They'd landed on a main supply route. The road from Sainte-Mère-Église to the coast was the main German artery for moving reinforcements to the beaches. Every German unit south of Normandy had to use this road to reach the invasion zone. And right now, in the middle of the night, the Germans were rushing everything they had north. Trucks, half-tracks, motorcycles, maybe even tanks. If they kept moving, the beaches would be slaughtered. Kowalski looked at the other 2 paratroopers. "We need to stop them." "Stop them? There's 3 of us." "I know. And about 1,000 of them." "I know." But then more paratroopers appeared. 4 from the 501st, 3 from the 502nd, 2 from the 506th. All scattered. All lost. All landing in the wrong place. Within 20 minutes, Kowalski had 19 men, none of them from the same unit. None of them supposed to be here. But they were here, on the road, with the trucks. One of the paratroopers, a sergeant from the 501st, had a bazooka. Another had a satchel charge. A third had a Bangalore torpedo. They weren't supposed to use them on the road. Their objective was the bridge. But the bridge was 6 miles north, and the Germans were here. Now. The sergeant looked at Kowalski. "What do you think?" Kowalski watched another truck roll past. He could hear more engines in the distance, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Every second they waited, more German troops moved toward the beaches. More firepower, more reinforcements. He made the decision. We hit them. What happened next wasn't in any training manual, because no one had planned for paratroopers to land on a supply route. No one had planned for scattered units to link up in enemy territory. And no one had planned for 19 men to take on an entire German convoy, with nothing but a bazooka and desperation. But that's exactly what they did. The ambush wasn't complicated. Kowalski positioned his men in 2 groups, 9 on the north side of the road, 10 on the south. The bazooka team took position behind a stone wall 30 yards from the road. Good angle, clear shot. The rest spread out in the hedgerows with rifles and grenades. Their orders were simple. Wait for the bazooka to fire, then hit everything that moved. Kowalski checked his watch. 1:47 a.m. He could hear more trucks coming. The rumble of engines echoed across the fields. He counted 4, maybe 5, moving slow, no headlights. The Germans were trying to stay invisible. The lead truck appeared around the bend, a German Opel Blitz, canvas top, probably carrying 20 soldiers. It rolled past the stone wall at 15 miles per hour. The driver's window was open. Kowalski could see the glow of a cigarette inside the cab. The bazooka fired. The rocket hit the truck's engine block. The explosion was sharp, bright. The truck lurched sideways, front tires shredded, hood blown open. Flames erupted from under the canvas. Soldiers spilled out the back shouting, scrambling for cover. The second truck slammed on its brakes, too fast. It skidded, fishtailed, crashed into the burning wreck. More soldiers jumped out. They had no idea where the attack came from, no idea how many Americans were in the hedgerows. They just knew they were taking fire. The paratroopers opened up. Rifle fire cracked from both sides of the road. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness. Shell casings clinked against stones. The air smelled like cordite and burning rubber. The Germans scattered. Some ran north, some ran south, some dove into the ditches and fired blindly into the hedgerows. The third truck tried to reverse. Its driver threw it into gear, wheels spinning, but a paratrooper with a satchel charge sprinted from the hedgerow and threw the explosive under the chassis. He dove flat. The charge detonated. The truck lifted 6 inches off the ground. Frame cracked, fuel tank ruptured. It didn't explode, it just stopped. Dead in the road. The fourth truck turned around. The driver gunned the engine, trying to escape south, back toward St. Mary Glees. But the Bangalore torpedo team was already in position. They'd crawled across the road during the confusion, planted the explosive in the ditch, and retreated. When the truck passed, they detonated it. The blast flipped the truck onto its side. Soldiers trapped inside screamed. Some crawled out. Some didn't. The entire ambush lasted 4 minutes. When the firing stopped, Kowalski counted the damage. 4 trucks destroyed, 2 more damaged. Approximately 60 German soldiers killed, wounded, or scattered. 0 American casualties. The paratroopers melted back into the hedgerows before German reinforcements arrived. But here's why it worked. The Germans weren't expecting contact. They thought they were behind their own lines. They thought the Americans were still over the beaches, still in their landing craft, still hours away from Normandy. The idea that paratroopers could be this far inland, this close to their supply routes, was impossible. So when the bazooka fired, they panicked. They didn't form a defensive line. They didn't coordinate their return fire. They just scattered. The paratroopers had stumbled into something the planners never anticipated. By landing in the wrong place, they'd landed in the perfect place, right on the main German supply route, where every truck, every half-track, every motorcycle had to pass. And because no one expected them there, they had total surprise. Kowalski didn't know it yet, but his 19-man unit had just discovered the most effective tactic of D-Day. Small groups, ambush positions, hit and run. Disrupt the enemy's rear. Make them think the invasion was everywhere. By 2:15 a.m., 3 more scattered paratrooper groups had found the road. By 3 a.m., there were 7 groups. By dawn, there were 23. All lost. All supposed to be somewhere else. All hitting German convoys with bazookas and satchel charges and whatever they could carry. The German command sent urgent messages to division headquarters. American paratroopers behind the lines. Strength unknown. Position unknown. Roads under attack. The Germans made a decision. Stop moving reinforcements north. Secure the roads first. Find the paratroopers. Eliminate the threat. Every minute they spent hunting scattered paratroopers was a minute they weren't reinforcing the beaches. But it all started with Thomas Whitaker's mistake. By 4 a.m., German General Wilhelm Falley was in his staff car racing toward the coast. He commanded the 91st Infantry Division, positioned directly behind Utah Beach. His orders were clear. Get to the beaches. Stop the invasion. But his car never made it. A paratrooper from the 508th, Corporal John Steele, was hiding in a ditch near Picoville when he heard the engine. A German staff car, moving fast. No escort. Steele had 1 grenade left. He pulled the pin, counted to 2, and threw it into the road. The grenade detonated under the front axle. The car swerved, crashed into a tree. Steele approached with his rifle raised, found 2 dead German officers in the front seat. One of them had general's insignia. He didn't know it, but he'd just killed the only German general who could coordinate the defense of Utah Beach. This wasn't skill. This wasn't planning. This was pure chaos working in the Allies' favor. The German response to the paratroop drops was massive and completely wrong. By dawn, German commanders believed they were facing a full-scale airborne invasion, paratroopers everywhere, behind the lines, on the roads, in the villages. Scattered reports came from 20 different locations. Some said 50 Americans. Some said 500. No one knew.
The German 709th Infantry Division, stationed near the coast, sent 4 companies inland to hunt paratroopers. That was 1,200 soldiers. 1,200 soldiers who should have been defending the beaches. Instead, they were chasing ghosts through the hedgerows. The German 243rd Infantry Division did the same, pulled 800 men from coastal positions, and sent them south to secure the roads that were already compromised. Roads where small groups of paratroopers hid and ran, then disappeared before reinforcements arrived. By 6:30 a.m., when the first landing craft hit Utah Beach, the German defenses were in shambles, not because of overwhelming force, but because of confusion, fear, uncertainty. The Germans had no idea how many Americans were behind their lines. They had no idea where the main attack was coming from. They had no idea if the beach landing was the real invasion or a diversion. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had warned them. He'd said the first 24 hours of the invasion would be decisive. Whoever controlled the beaches in the first day would win the war. But his entire defensive strategy assumed the Allies would land where they were expected, in organized waves, with clear objectives. The scattered paratroop drops destroyed that assumption. American casualties on Utah Beach were the lowest of any D-Day landing, 197 killed, compared to Omaha Beach's 2,000. Military historians have debated this for decades. Why was Utah so much easier? Better planning? Better luck? Better terrain? The answer was simpler. The Germans weren't there. Not in full strength. Not in coordinated positions. Because half of them were inland, chasing paratroopers who'd landed in the wrong place. Thomas Whitaker's plane landed back in England at 3:42 a.m. He climbed out of the radio compartment, exhausted, hands still shaking from the adrenaline. The pilot clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work tonight, radio. Clean drop. Right on target." Whitaker nodded. Didn't say anything. He'd done his job. Followed the beacon. Got the paratroopers to the drop zone. Mission accomplished. He went to the debriefing tent, filled out his report. Frequency 42.1. Green signal. Strong and steady. Dropped on schedule. The intelligence officer barely looked at the report. He was processing 200 similar reports. Pilots and radio operators all saying the same thing. Dropped on target. Mission successful. But 3 days later, when the after-action reports came in from Normandy, someone noticed something strange. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment was supposed to drop at Drop Zone A, but they'd landed at Drop Zone C, 6 miles south, along with parts of the 501st, 506th, and 508th, 127 men from Whitaker's plane, plus 600 more from other planes in the formation, all landing in the wrong place, all following the same beacon, all tuned to frequency 42.1. The intelligence officer pulled Whitaker's report and realized what had happened. The investigation took 6 weeks. Intelligence officers interviewed pilots, radio operators, navigators. They studied frequency logs. They mapped where paratroopers actually landed versus where they were supposed to land. They cross-referenced beacon signals with Pathfinder positions. The pattern was clear. 17 C-47s in the first wave had tuned to frequency 42.1 instead of 38.7. 17 planes carrying 723 paratroopers, all landing at Drop Zone C, all landing in the wrong place. And the reason was identical in every case. The primary frequency was dead or weak. The radio operators searched for alternatives, found 42.1, assumed it was the backup. But the investigators found something else, something unexpected. Those 723 paratroopers who landed in the wrong place had disrupted German operations more effectively than any unit that landed in the right place. The ambushes along the supply routes, the attacks on convoys, the killing of General Falley.
the confusion that pulled German reserves away from the beaches. All of it came from paratroopers who were supposed to be somewhere else. A colonel from the 82nd Airborne wrote in his report, "The accidental drops near St. Mary-Église created chaos in the German rear that no planned operation could have achieved. Small groups of paratroopers acting independently convinced the Germans they were facing a much larger force. This forced the enemy to commit reserves to internal security rather than beach defense." Another report from British intelligence analyzed German radio intercepts from June 6th. Between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., German units sent over 200 urgent messages about paratroopers behind the lines, messages requesting reinforcements, messages reporting attacks on roads, messages saying the situation was out of control. Every message meant German commanders were looking inland, not at the beaches. The math was simple. The 723 paratroopers who landed in the wrong place tied down over 4,000 German troops, a ratio of nearly 6 to 1. Those 4,000 German soldiers should have been defending Utah Beach. Instead, they were hunting scattered paratroopers in the dark. American casualties at Utah Beach were 197 killed. Projected casualties, based on pre-invasion estimates, were 3,000. The difference was 2,800 lives saved. Not because of superior firepower, not because of better tactics, but because the Germans were somewhere else. The investigation reached the conclusion: Thomas Whitaker's mistake wasn't a mistake. It was the luckiest accident of the invasion. But the Army couldn't admit that publicly. If they admitted a radio operator had tuned to the wrong frequency and accidentally saved thousands of lives, it would undermine confidence in the entire operation. It would suggest the invasion succeeded because of luck, not planning. And that was unacceptable. So they buried the report, classified it, filed it away, and told the radio operators nothing. Whitaker returned to his unit in July. No one mentioned the frequency. No one asked about the drop. He assumed everything had gone according to plan. His commander shook his hand, said he'd done good work, and assigned him to another mission. Whitaker flew 12 more combat drops. France, Holland, Germany. Every time, he followed the frequency card. Every time, he trusted the beacon. Every time, he did exactly what he was trained to do. He never knew that the one time he didn't follow the rules, he saved more lives than all the other times combined. The truth stayed classified for 32 years. In 1976, a military historian named Colonel Samuel Morrison was researching airborne operations for a book on D-Day. He had full access to the archives, classified documents, after-action reports, intelligence assessments. He found the investigation file about frequency 42.1, read the reports, traced the paratroopers, mapped their actions, and realized the scope of what had happened. Morrison tracked down Thomas Whitaker. He was living in Pennsylvania, married, 3 children, working as a radio technician for a television station in Pittsburgh. He'd left the Army in 1946 with an honorable discharge, a Bronze Star for his service in Holland, and no idea that his first combat mission had been anything other than routine. Morrison called him, asked if they could meet. Whitaker said yes. They sat in Whitaker's living room on a Saturday afternoon in October. Morrison brought the file, spread the documents on the coffee table, explained what the investigation had found, showed him the maps, the casualty figures, the German intercepts, the timeline of how the accidental drop had cascaded into chaos that saved thousands of lives. Whitaker sat in silence. His hands rested on his knees. He stared at the documents. Finally, he spoke. "I thought I'd followed the procedure. I thought 42.1 was the backup." "It wasn't," Morrison said. "It was Drop Zone C's primary frequency. You sent those paratroopers 6 miles off target, and that saved them. It saved more than them. It changed the entire invasion." Whitaker looked out the window. His grandchildren were playing in the yard. He'd never told them much about the war, never thought there was much to tell. He'd been a radio operator, sat in a plane, turned dials, did his job. Nothing heroic, nothing worth remembering. Morrison closed the file. The Army never told you because they didn't want to admit the invasion succeeded partly because of luck. But it wasn't just luck. You made a decision under pressure. You found a working frequency when the primary failed. You kept the mission going. That took initiative. I was just trying not to screw up. You didn't screw up. You adapted. Whitaker didn't see it that way. For 32 years, he'd assumed D-Day went according to plan. Smooth, professional, exactly as trained. Learning that it was chaos, that his actions had consequences he never imagined, didn't make him feel like a hero. It made him feel small, like a man who'd stumbled into history by accident and walked away without knowing. But Morrison understood something Whitaker didn't. War isn't won by perfect plans. It's won by people who make decisions in the moment, who adapt when things go wrong, who do their best with incomplete information and keep moving forward. The 723 paratroopers who landed at Drop Zone C didn't know they were in the wrong place. They just fought. The Germans who chased them through the hedgerows didn't know it was a mistake. They just responded to the threat. And Thomas Whitaker, sitting in a freezing radio compartment at 1:16 a.m. on June 6, 1944, didn't know his decision would save thousands of lives. He just twisted a dial and hoped it would work. That's the reality of D-Day. Not the clean narrative in the history books, not the orchestrated precision of the official reports, but the chaos, the mistakes, the accidents that became advantages, the ordinary people who made impossible decisions and never knew the full consequences. Thomas Whitaker died in 1989. He was 68 years old. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette mentioned his service in World War II. Radio operator, 82nd Airborne, Bronze Star recipient. It didn't mention Frequency 42.1. It didn't mention the Paratroopers. It didn't mention the roads near Sainte-Mère-Église, or the confusion that saved Utah Beach. But his family knew. Morrison had told them the story, and at the funeral, one of Whitaker's grandsons stood up and said this: "My grandfather never talked much about the war. He said he just did his job. But I learned that sometimes doing your job in the middle of chaos is the most heroic thing you can do." The classified file was declassified in 1994. You can read it now. It's in the National Archives. File number RG407, Box 24088, 37 pages. Maps, radio logs, casualty figures, all documenting how one radio operator's decision on a freezing night over Normandy changed the course of the largest invasion in history. Not because he was perfect, but because when everything went wrong, he found a way to keep going. And sometimes, that's enough. The story of Thomas Whitaker is one of thousands that never made it into the history books. Ordinary men and women who made split-second decisions that changed everything. Mechanics who improvised repairs under fire. Gunners who invented new tactics in the middle of combat. Radio operators who adapted when the plan fell apart. These stories matter, not because they're about heroes, but because they're about people like us. People who didn't know if they'd survive the next hour. People who did their best with what they had. People who never knew the full impact of their actions. If you want to hear more of these untold stories from World War II, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every week, we bring you the real accounts, the moments that didn't make the official reports, the decisions that changed history, the people who never got the recognition they deserved. Because their stories deserve to be remembered.